brings to mind something I heard Minister Farrakhan say years ago when he was saying the cream of the crop of our people. He said most of the people that are leading today, including himself, he said back in school days, I'm willing to bet you were mediocre. You weren't the top of your class. You were mediocre. He said, but what happened to the top of the class? The top of the class, he said, was dead on drugs and jail because he says this system of white supremacy shares off the top. So only a few get through, but the rebellious ones, those that didn't accept the bending and the molding, those are the ones that they tried to destroy.
And you know what is the statistics of people that go into slavery, and what do they have to do to get out of slavery? It's some real precise statistics, and it ain't a lot of ways to get out of it. That's why a majority of niggas on the planet, they still trying to figure it out. They revolting, they doing all that, but they still ain't seem to break free from this cracker. And you know, that's why I come with a scorched earth policy. You know, if I see a cracker, I'm beefing, straight up. If I see it in any of your philosophies, and it come down to you justifying a peck of wood, disseminating information to black people, I got a problem with that.
There was an older gentleman here in Washington, D.C. I met some years ago. His name was Neely Fuller. Now, Neely Fuller was a companion of Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. They traveled together and did a lot of joint lectures together. Neely Fuller wrote a book called The Compensatory Code. And a lot of people didn't understand. Neely was a deep thinker, but at the time he published his book and he went around giving lectures about it, he was speaking over the heads of a lot of people. But what Neely was saying is that language is very important. What you say and how you say it. If you're not precise, you can end up using language to imprison your own self because of the misuse of words as such. Now listen, if the young people want to get respect of a lot of old fogies with gray hair like me, and other brothers have been out here in the field for many, many years as such, and they want to sound like they've been totally assimilated, all right, and sound like a black-white person, using their king's language correctly, as they say, hey, the young people are not going to listen to them when they come in to speak that way. I know the reaction that people have to me. I speak better to older audiences today than I do to younger audiences. You want to know what type of audience scares the hell out of me? An audience of high school kids. When I go in to speak to them, because I don't quite speak their language using their vernacular. They use different what's called colloquial expressions, or they use different forms of slang than what was popular when I was a young man. But that's our nature. We used the type of slang 10,000 years ago. We talk in metaphors. We still talk in metaphors, but we and our young folk are creative enough to update the type of slang they use from age to age. I'll give you an example. In the 1920s, when Satchmo was playing his horn and helping to create jazz, along with jazz music, what white folks who thought they was hip, as they called it, would speak in the same slang as the jazz musicians, as such, right? Using the slang of black folk. And 20 years later, when Dizzy Gillespie and Miles Davis and this younger generation of musicians came up off of the music that had already been laid down by Satchmo, they took the music and recreated it into bebop jazz. But along with bebop jazz, there came a bebop talk, there became a bebop dress style that accompanied the music. All right? 20 years or so later, another generation comes along, what we call with soul and rock and roll, but the black rhythm and blues movement that turned into soul and what have you, created another way of producing our music and another slang that went along with it. Now let me come 20 years further to late 1970s and the early 80s. And what happens up out of New York City and the East Coast, and then it spreads across, the young folk again create another way of presenting our music and another language to go along with it. They call it hip hop as such. So the music keeps evolving, as it were, or the younger generations will come along and take what the generation before them created, and then they will add their own flavor to it. Well, the same thing happens with language as such. So the younger folk create their own slang and their own form of language and a way of communicating. Right now, during this age, what I call the gangster rap age, where gangster rap is the form of the music to some degree, where the language is hard. I mean, hey, the worst thing I ever want to hear brothers say, I got my finger on the trigger, gonna kill me a nigga. That kind of stuff. Well, guess what? So the intellectual language that's reaching that generation is gonna sound like Seti and Young Pharaoh. It's not gonna sound like a scholar who graduated from Howard University. It don't mean they're not scholars. It means that they have decided there is an audience of people. There's a generation of young black people, especially young black men, who need to be addressed, who needs to be awakened, and that an intellectual scholar speaking perfect King's English is not going to reach them. You have to almost smack these kids upside the head to get them still to want to listen. And what Seti's language does, I call it, it's the shock mode of getting folks to sit down and listen to language that they are comfortable with. So for the older scholars, leave these young people alone. You didn't raise up no army of folk that's going out accomplishing anything with the way you're addressing the people. You've been out here many years, and yeah, you're traveling, and you can still get lectures, and you're still getting paid. You know, but it ain't a whole bunch of folks running around out here raising your banner that you're the #1 scholar based on what you've done. You had your work. You had the people who listened to you, the people who liked your style. Let these young men who are trying something new continue on the path that they are continuing on. You know, because I have read documents, you know, when at a time when we couldn't speak the King's English perfectly, and white people made fun of Marcus Garvey because of how he spoke. People made fun of a lot of scholars out of the 1920s who came here from the Caribbean who spoke English with that Caribbean patois slang to it, right? Because they're not speaking the correct King's English as such. So people keep getting caught up in the details of the bullshit and want to make the bullshit the real thing, instead of the substance of what the message that the brother is bringing. So Seti, if you get a chance to see this brother again, you come back to D.C., you get down here, I hope to be at the spot where you are, and I'm going to pat you on the back and shake your hands. Because what you're doing, I think you know who your audience is, you know who you're trying to reach, and don't worry about the naysayers who want you to do it their way. If their way was perfect, you know, they would have the audiences that you have.
How about that?